Right, good evening everybody, and welcome along to this evening's Rushcliffe Borough Council Planning Committee meeting. I'd like to remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. A recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on the Council's YouTube channel. In addition, under the Local Authorities, Executive Arrangements, Meetings and Access to Information England Regulations 2012, other people may film, record, post on social media or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the Council's control. May I remind councillors to please switch your microphones off when you are not speaking and switch them on when you are speaking. Just before we go into the meeting, we have members of the public here this evening. So I'm Councillor Richard Butler, the chairman of the committee. Councillor Rex Walker is vice chairman, and we also have, is Helen here? No, she's not. So we also have Andrew Cullen, who's the planning manager, Christina Dinescu, area planning officer, and Rachel Clack, legal services manager. So we'll now move on to the first item on the agenda, and that's apologies for absence, please.
Yes, Chair. Councillor Wells sends apologies and is substituted for this meeting by Councillor Regan. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Councillor Regan. Your first planning committee. So, yeah, and so welcome. And item 2 is declarations of interest. I think Councillor Rex Walker has an interest to record.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I declare a non-pecuniary interest in planning application in Frampton. I'll be standing down from the committee to fulfil role as ward member, and then after that, we'll be leaving the room and not partaking in the debate or the vote.
Okay, thank you very much. And for the record, any other declarations? No. Okay. So item 3 is minutes of the previous meeting held on the 10th of October. Those of us who are here, are we happy that the minutes are accurate? Happy? Oh, 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 I'm happy. Oh, that's good. That's you had us worried for a moment there. So that's right. So we're all happy. So I'll sign them then. And yeah, so did I. And so we'll move into tonight's planning applications. We have 2 applications to discuss, debate and decide on tonight. The first one of those is 146 Loughborough Road, West Bridgeford, Ruddington, sorry, 146 Loughborough Road, Ruddington. And this is the extensions and, sorry, this is a new build on Loughborough Road, Ruddington. So, Mrs. Dinescu, if you're going to talk us through this, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The application site relates to part of the garden area of number 146 Loughborough Road, a 2-storey detached dwelling which is located at the end of a private driveway set behind properties that front Loughborough Road. Due to the location, the host dwelling and the application site are not visible from the public realm. The driveway measures approximately 59 meters in length. Adjoining properties are comprised of 2 detached bungalows to the north and south at numbers 146A and 146B Loughborough Road, 2-storey dwellings on Loughborough Road to the east and 2-storey dwellings to the west on Rufford Road. It is worth noting the host dwelling benefits from an extant planning permission for extensions and alterations, a reference number 24/01191/4. This is the host dwelling. This is the access to the site. from the private drive. This is the driveway. And these are views of the site looking westwards. This is actually towards the boundary with the properties on Ruford Road. This is southwards towards the bungalow at 146A, Loughborough Road. Eastwards towards the properties on Loughborough Road. And towards northwards towards the bungalow at 146B, Loughborough Road. Permission is sought to build a 1.5-story detached dwelling to the west of the host dwelling. Access would be provided from the private driveway that would be continued to the northern elevation of the host dwelling. The dwelling would have a modern design with pitched roof and a flat roof element to the rear, 4 bedrooms and a T-shaped footprint. Officers have negotiated the scale and design of the scheme during the life of the application and sought amendments which are being presented at this meeting. These included the reduced scale of the property to 1.5 stories, reduced depth of the rear wing, the property being set further away from 146B and re-elevated so that there are no windows facing this property. This is the ground floor proposed. You can see the courtyard arrangement, access to a double garage, and the usual living space normally found in a dwelling. The first floor, 4 bedrooms with windows facing away from neighboring properties or or protected by separation distances. This is the north elevation proposed. You can see roof lights at first floor. These would face number 146B, Loughborough Road. You can also see here the relationship with the host dwelling, much lower eaves and ridge height, and lowered ground level. This is the east elevation, fronting the boundary with the properties on Loughborough Road. The rear elevation, facing 146A Loughborough Road. And this is the west elevation, and this is what the occupiers of the properties on Ruford Road would be seeing from their windows and their rear garden areas. These trees are proposed to be retained, and first floor windows are roof lights. And this is what the elevation would look like if it weren't screened by trees. As a result of the public consultation, neighbours and the ward councillor have raised objections. The objections raised relate to loss of privacy and overlooking, drainage issues, harmful to the character and pattern of development, inappropriate massing, overdevelopment, loss of trees and vegetation. The main planning considerations are the principle of the development, character of the area and design, residential amenity, highway safety, ecology and trees, and flood risk. Backland development is a character feature of the area as noted in the Ruddington Design Guide Character Area 10, as there are several clusters of properties development behind dwellings fronting Loughborough Road, including the application site. The existing site is not considered to have any characteristics that offer significant benefits to the amenity of the surrounding area by virtue of its character, and it does not have a particularly open nature. The principle of the development is therefore acceptable in this location, subject to satisfying all other planning considerations. The proposed 1.5-story dwelling would be set to the rear of the host dwelling. It would have a courtyard arrangement with access to a double garage and turning point. The resulting plot would be similar in size to other plots within the immediate area, as well as the resulting plot of the host dwelling, and whilst the footprint of the proposed dwelling appears large, the resulting garden area would be of a usable size, bearing in mind the resulting plot would have an approximately area of 741 square meters. I've broken down the proposed areas for the plot in this slide. You can see the proposed area, 741 square meters for the plot, the proposed footprint area of 320 square meters, and the usable garden area, and this refers to this area to the rear. Which would be approximately 286 square meters. We therefore consider the site is capable of accommodating the proposed dwelling without appearing cramped or over-intensive. With regards to the scale of the proposed dwelling, the neighbouring properties are 2-story and single-story in scale. And it is considered the 1.5-story proposed dwelling would be a balanced addition to the mix of the area, whilst its design would also be acceptable, given the very limited contribution the site makes to the street scene. In terms of residential amenity, the overall design, internal layout, site orientation, and separation distances proposed, we consider there would be no significant undue impact on the residential amenities of the occupiers of any adjacent property. The properties on Rushcliffe Road have deeper gardens, and the bulk of the proposed dwelling is broken down through fragmentation of the roof, which I have shown previously, and you can see in this slide. And the screening provided by the existing and proposed to be retained trees. The adjacent bungalows to the north would be protected by the distance at which the dwelling would be set in relation to the common boundaries, as well as, both bungalows to the north and south would be protected by the distance at which the dwelling would be set in relation to the common boundaries, as well as lack of windows serving habitable rooms in the northern elevation. The properties to the east are protected by the separation distances and intervening development. And you can see here the separation distances from elevations to common boundaries. The flat roof area would not be used as a balcony, and the condition would ensure this is adhered to throughout the life of the development. In terms of highway safety, officers are satisfied the proposed dwelling would utilize the existing driveway, whilst sufficient space for maneuvering would be provided within the application site. It is considered the proposed dwelling is unlikely to generate significant increase in traffic to warrant safety concerns on Loughborough Road. Sufficient off-street parking is proposed to serve the proposed dwelling as well as the host dwelling. Therefore, the proposal is considered to be acceptable with regards to highway safety and off-street parking provision. With regards to ecology and trees, it is worth noting that the trees present on site have the potential to to host roosting bats, and a condition is recommended to deal with this aspect, as well as measures to ensure the trees are protected during construction works. Site enhancement measures would also be incorporated within the development, and a condition would ensure this is achieved. It is worth noting that the proposed development is exempt from biodiversity net gain based on the submission date prior to 2nd of April 2024. In conclusion, we consider that in this instance, the proposed development is a sustainable form of development that would make a small contribution to the housing supply within the borough. It is also considered to be acceptable in terms of design and layout, and would not, subject to the suggested conditions presented in the report, have a harmful impact on the character of the area, highway safety, residential amenity, or ecology. It is therefore considered that the proposed development would be in accordance with the relevant policies within the development plan, and as such, the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Just before we go on as well, I should have mentioned at the start of the meeting, just to confirm, colleagues have received further representations from the applicant on this. I just need to make that, check that for the record. So we have received those, which moves on now to our guest speakers. We have, well, we were due to have two speakers. We've got Mr. Kerrison, who is the applicant, and Councillor Jen Walker had registered to speak, but she doesn't appear to be here at the moment, but not to worry. So, Mr. Kerrison, if you'd like to have a seat. And the way it works, you've got up to 5 minutes to speak to us, the way press the right-hand button, the red light will come on. If you're still speaking at 4.5 minutes, we'll tell you there's 30 seconds left, and if you're still speaking at 5 minutes, we have to cut you off. Okay, so as soon as you're ready, press the button.
Well, firstly, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. A number of issues have been raised by local residents, which I believe were to be represented by Councillor Walker, but I'd like to respond to them anyway. I've emailed some notes to all members of the committee covering these points, which I hope you've all seen. The first point's on the principle of development. This has been established by a pre-application approval to the previous owner. It's confirmed that the site access, potential highway issues and other general planning matters were all acceptable, and confirmed that a 1.5-storey scale dwelling would be appropriate in this location. We were not involved in this original submission, and our initial application. Further to objections about the scale of the property, we sat down with the planning officers to consider a redesign. We removed the 2-storey element and reduced the scale of the entire building to 1.5 stories, resulting in the revised proposals before you that have been recommended for approval. A point on scale and massing. A number of residents have objected to the height of the proposed house and requested a reduction to 1-story only. We believe there is no planning justification for this, and the council has already formally advised that a 1.5-story scale development would be acceptable. The original scheme has been reduced from an 8-metre 2-storey house to a 6.7-metre 1.5-storey property, and the impact is further ameliorated by the lower level of the land on which the proposed building is situated, as illustrated by the submission circulated to you. Intensity. There have been some comments that the proposed building footprint is too large for the site. The aerial footprint is slightly misleading since the building breaks down into distinct elements. The main core of the house is of similar footprint to neighbouring properties. This contains most of the habitable rooms and bedrooms. The main reason the footprint appears enlarged is because of the garages in the corner of the site have been linked to the main core of the house. This 1-storey glazed link has been used to create the main entrance hall and an enclosed courtyard at the front of the house. Therefore, whilst the plan form appears quite large, each element is at a different scale and height, breaking the building down to ensure that it doesn't overwhelm the plot or adversely impact the amenities of neighbouring property. The developer maintains a large rear garden and, importantly, complies with all of the council's space about building standards. Overlooking has been raised. Well, the buildings, in our view, have been carefully designed to ensure there are no overlooking impacts, and on review of a number of the comments, I do think this issue has perhaps not been fully appreciated. So looking south to the bungalow at 146A, there is a dense mature screen of vegetation along the whole boundary that will be maintained. The main southern elevation is 18 metres from the boundary, and in any event, none of these rooms will have a clear view into the adjacent garden because of the density of the existing tree and hedge screen. Looking in the opposite direction north to the bungalow at 146B, there are no upper floor habitable room windows facing this property. The only windows are glazing to the main atrium space and a single bathroom roof light, which will obviously be obscure glazed. It's therefore considered there will be no overlooking impacts in this direction, though additional boundary screen planting is proposed to provide further protection. Finally, looking to the properties at the west of Rufford Road, there are no, again, habitable room windows on this elevation. The only windows are roof lights to the stairwell and bathroom, and these will be obscure glazed. We would encourage members to look at this issue carefully because, in our view, it is of very little significance. In conclusion, most of the objections raised by neighbouring residents are based on demands that their views must be protected and that any development on site should be restricted to single storey. This is perhaps understandable in that all householders would wish to restrict the scale of development next door to something they can't see. But we would submit this is not a sustainable position in planning terms. We'd also submit that presumption should be in favour of development unless it causes significant harm. And based on all the issues which have been set out, we would say that this is not the case. I would also mention that my partner in this project has purchased the existing house known as the host property on your presentation, and will be refurbishing it to live in with his family. And he certainly doesn't want to get off to a bad start to upset the neighbours. The relationship between the proposed dwelling and neighbouring buildings is consistent with countless housing developments in Ruddington and Rushcliffe, and there are no special circumstances in this location that justify additional protection beyond the space standards normally applied to new development. As such, we would hope that members will support the recommendation of officers and grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just within 5 minutes, so that's appreciated. Thank you. So we've heard from Mr. Kerrison there, who's obviously the applicant and is making his explain some of the points, and also he did pick up on some of the objections that are in the report. So do we want to come back on it? I don't think we probably do we? I think we can go straight into a discussion and decision. So Councillor Edivine.
Thank you, Chair. Having listened to the arguments, I think when I first read this report, it was fairly obvious that the applicant had worked closely with the planning team. They'd revised their plans, and certainly reading the report, I couldn't see any reason why this application should be refused. And I have to say, I've not heard anything tonight that has changed my view on that. So, in other words, I'm not prejudging it. I was waiting to see what was said tonight. But it's quite clear that it's a sustainable development. It's not out of keeping with the area. And, you know, no one's coming along to us to give us material reasons why we shouldn't actually approve this. So I'm more than happy to listen to any debate, but I would like to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation on this.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Edivine. Very clear. Well, it is early in the discussion, but I need to ask: do you have a seconder for that at this stage? Councillor Ellis, do you wish to add anything? Do you wish to?
No, I think,
Oh, just put your microphone on.
Councillor Edivine's covered everything adequately, and I think his judgment is totally correct.
Okay, thank you very much. But Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, I just have three questions really, or issues to clarify. The first is, it's described as a 1.5-storey building. I was wondering what that actually means and how it's distinguished from a 2-storey building. The second is, which elevation is the Juliet balcony on? Is that on the elevation that faces 146A and screened by the dense vegetation? And if so, is that dense vegetation on the which property owns that dense vegetation? I.e., is it in the control of the property that will be affected by that elevation? Okay, well, that's two. Yeah, three.
Okay, thank you. Yes, could you pick up on those,
Yep.
please?
Thank you. So 1.5 story dwelling, it means, first of all, the eaves and ridge height are reduced than a normal 2-story dwelling, and only not entirely the whole first floor is usable because of the reduced lowered eaves. So that makes it 1.5 story dwelling. And
Sorry, can I just clarify? So is that because not all of it has got 2 floors? Is that why it's 1.5?
yes. And the first floor is actually reduced in floor area, so it can't be used as a normal head height floor. Yeah. The southern elevation includes the Juliet balcony, and it is the one facing 146A. We have a condition to deal with landscape, and we'll make sure that the existing vegetation is retained along that boundary to ensure screening.
Thank you. Did I see any other hands going up or any other questions? Sorry, Councillor Mason. Yeah.
I can't see any reason why not. We can't support this. I think, could I just ask about the driveway? Can I just have a look at how wide it would be, just to make sure that, I mean, I'm sure it is wide enough, but it is quite a length. And I just wondered if there are any passing places on it or anything.
So the driveway is approximately 59 meters in length. It's not wide enough for 2 cars to pass side by side, but there is, I need to go back. Oh, it's not working. So I'm going to go back to the aerial photograph. That's a photograph.
It's quite a long one.
Yes, but it serves 3 dwellings at the moment. Oh. Right, so there is room here at the entrance for a car to move off the highway and wait for another car to exit if that is necessary. And the proposal does make arrangements for turning within the site and for the host dwelling as well.
Thank you. Does that help, Councillor Mason?
Yes, it does,
Okay.
especially now I can see that there is room. I was a bit worried that the car going in would have to be actually on the road all the time. Well, a friend of mine has when I visit her, I have to reverse out and yeah. So I was just concerned, but I can see that, yes, that is being dealt with. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Calvert.
Just an observation that when I first looked at the application, it looked very much like village cramming, forcing a development in a very tight space, but actually it seems to be totally in character with the local area, which has a very similar thing. So I don't have great difficulty with it. Just one question or comment about the condition 8, which is linked to biodiversity. I'm very pleased that that's been included, because I think from the text it implied that it wasn't absolutely necessary. Just hope that the enforcement continues through the lifetime of the development. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Calvert. Anyone else wish to speak on this? So, Councillor Thomas again.
Yes, I was just going to ask, I see Councillor Walker has arrived, whether or not she's going to be allowed to present. Thank you.
Well, we are in a position where we've had the presentation from the applicant, who did pick up or did comment on the points that have been made by Councillor Walker and other objectors. Well, we've had the recommendation moved and seconded. So procedural wise, let's just take some advice on that.
Well, I think procedural wise, Chair, I think unfortunately the recommendation in the report has been moved and seconded. So, and we've started the debate. So unfortunately for Councillor Walker, I'm afraid I think it's too late on this occasion. I think in future occasions, perhaps if it was submitted, then, you know, I could have read it out, but I think in the circumstances, unfortunately, it was too late to hear from Councillor Walker.
Right, thank you. And also, I think as colleagues will have heard, we have read and heard the arguments both for the application and against, even if we didn't hear them directly in speech and words, but we've read and seen them. So that's the answer to your question. So any other speakers on this one before we go to a decision? So we have had a debate and Councillor Mallender.
Can I just say I won't be voting because I was late and I didn't hear everything. Shame we can't hear Councillor Walker really.
Thank you, Councillor Mallender. That's a point well picked up about not being able to vote. So, right, we've had the discussion debate. I think we've asked questions and had the questions answered. All seems clear. Recommendation has been moved and seconded as per the reports and recommendations. So, show of hands, please. Those in favour, please show. So that's 7. And Councillor Mallon is not voting on this one. And for the record, anyone against? No, and no abstentions. So permission is granted. Okay. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you, colleagues, for contributions. And Councillor Walker, I hope you understand the rules and procedures we have to follow. But we did have quite a discussion and debate. So we'll just do some musical movement of chairs now. Where are we? So move on to our second application, which is Fields Farm, Barton Lane, Thrumpton. And this is the demolition of an existing extension, a detached building, outbuilding, and it's to erect two-storey side extension, single-storey rear extension, rear dormer, windows replacement, bay windows to the front. And again, this is Nescu, if you're going to talk us through this, please.
Thank you, Chair. The application site relates to a two-storey detached dwelling located within the Greenbelt on the northwestern side of Barton Lane, to the east of Thrumpton and within Thrumpton Conservation Area. The dwelling has been extended through the addition of a single-storey side and rear, single-storey side and rear extensions. The relevant planning history is presented within the agenda at page 30. Planning permission is sought for two-storey side extensions, single-storey rear extension, replace front bay windows, and new rear-facing dormer windows. This is the property as existing, as viewed from Barton Lane. Viewed from the rear garden, looking westwards towards the adjacent converted agricultural buildings. Looking northwards. This is the existing site plan. It shows the application site outlined in red on the left-hand side, and the extent of the ownership outlined in blue. And on the right-hand side, it's the existing site plan. The existing floor plans and elevations. The result of the public consultation is presented within the agenda at pages 30 to 32. However, it is worth noting that Ward Councillor Walker and the parish meeting are supporting the proposed development. And I think it's appropriate to quote from the comments made by Thrumpton Parish meeting, who is keen to support small-scale modifications or extensions to village properties which help accommodate the changing needs and circumstances of residents, particularly where that allows residents and their families to remain within the village. To support these aims, we are developing a neighbourhood plan for Thrumpton to provide more flexibility for these types of small-scale changes given our greenbelt and conservation area setting, and formally set out what this means for our parish. This is under development. Neighbours have raised no objections. The Conservation Officer is objecting to the proposed development. The main issues in the consideration of the application are whether the proposal represents inappropriate development in the greenbelt, impact on heritage assets and visual amenity, impact on residential amenity, flood risk, and biodiversity net gain. Officers are recommending refusal on grounds of impact on greenbelt and heritage assets. I will go through the proposed plans first. You can see the two-story side extensions, the single-story rear extension, the proposed elevations front and side, rear and side. Impact on greenbelt. Rushcliffe Borough Council has an internal guidance note for development proposals in the greenbelt, and this sets a limit on volume for extensions of up to 50% cubic volume increase above the volume of the original building, which may be considered not disproportionate where the scale and massing are also acceptable. The building on site has been extended in the past, however, the proposal would involve the removal of the existing extensions. Overall, the proposed extensions would have a volume of approximately 387 cubic meters, which would represent 71.8% additional volume above that of the original building. This would be significantly above the council's threshold for extensions, and therefore it is considered the proposed extensions would result in a disproportionate addition to the original dwelling, and therefore is considered inappropriate development in the greenbelt. The harm to the openness of the greenbelt is considered to be moderate given the scale, massing, and location proposed. Inappropriate development is harmful to the greenbelt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. Paragraph 153 of the NPPF states that very special circumstances will not exist unless the potential harm to the greenbelt and any other harm resulting from the proposal is clearly outweighed by other considerations. The comments from Councillor Walker and the parish meeting in relation to the changing needs of families and allowing them to stay in the village are noted. However, these reasons are not considered to be exceptional circumstances to justify going against the national policy and the council's assessment in respect of the proposal constituting inappropriate development in the greenbelt. Thrumpton does not have a neighbourhood plan, and therefore the position put forward does not form part of the development plan, nor is a material consideration. It is considered that the proposed development does not demonstrate that very special circumstances exist that would clearly outweigh the harm to the openness of the greenbelt and would therefore be contrary to the aims of Section 13 of the NPPF and Policy 21 of the Local Planning Document Part 2. I have presented here the original plan, an extract from an OS plan dating from 1960, which shows the original footprint of the farmhouse, which had an original volume of 539 cubic meters. On the right-hand side, I've presented the existing footprint, basically what the property looks like today. And it has a total existing volume, which includes the original volume, of 737 cubic meters. and the volume of the existing extensions, which are the additions to the original volume, represent 198 cubic meters. So based on the original volume of the property, it has already been extended by 36% additional volume. The proposed development would represent 387.84 cubic meters. In total, of 926.84 cubic meters. So that's the proposed extensions and the original dwelling. And the extensions on their own would represent 71.8% above the original volume. This is why we consider that the proposal is inappropriate development and it should be refused for this reason. Moving on to heritage assets and visual amenity. The proposal relates to a late Victorian traditional red brick slate farmhouse at Fields Farm within Thrumpton Conservation Area. The dwelling dates from 1881 and it retains many period features such as terracotta moldings making up a string-course brick detailing to the eaves, a front projecting two-story gable with porch at ground level, arched headers to large windows and decorative chimney stacks to the gable ends. The farmhouse is set within a large plot surrounded by mature trees and hedges to the northeast, east and southwest boundaries. Views across the open countryside are possible to and from the application site. The dwelling is not an identified positive building according to the appraisal plan for the conservation area. However, it does make a strong positive contribution to the conservation area given the architectural and historic interest of the dwelling, and it is a non-designated heritage asset. The significance of the dwelling derives from its late 19th century origins, layout and plan form, use of vernacular materials and detailing and retention of historic fabric and features. The dwelling also derives significance from its historic function as a farmhouse with its adjacent former agricultural ranges and its likely connection with Lord Belper of nearby Kingston Hall, given the inscribed date stone and the large estate in the local area known to have been associated with him. The farmhouse is reflective of the historic settlement pattern and the agricultural nature I'll start again. The farmhouse is reflective of the historic settlement pattern and the agricultural nature of the village, thus positively contributing to the street scene and the character and appearance of the Thrumpton Conservation Area. The proposed development would be highly visible from the public realm as approaching on Barton Lane and across the open countryside. The proposed form, including scale and massing for the two proposed side extensions, is considered too large. Oh, sorry. Apologies. And would appear disproportionate to the scale of the 1881 farmhouse, and therefore the extensions would not have a subordinate appearance. The location to either side of the host dwelling would enhance the disproportionality and lack of subservience appearance by dominating the main elevation, which would harm the character and appearance of the host dwelling. The proposed side extensions are not considered acceptable, and any views and glimpses from and or into the conservation area would be affected in a way that could harm the special interest of the conservation area. Therefore, it is considered the proposed development would harm the character and appearance of the conservation area. Whilst the level of harm would be at the lower end of the less than substantial scale, officers are required by the NPPF to weigh the harm against public benefits. It is considered, given the private residential use of the application site, no public benefits would derive from the proposal, and therefore the proposed development is contrary to Section 16 of the NPPF and relevant policies of the development plan. In terms of residential amenity, it is considered, given the scale, design, and location of the proposed extensions, relationship with adjoining properties, and separation distance, the proposal would not result in a significantly undue impact on the residential amenities of the occupiers of any adjoining property. With regards to the other considerations, these are presented within the agenda at pages 37 to 38, and it is worth noting the Council has no objections to the proposed development on grounds of flood risk, trees and ecology, and biodiversity net gain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive. Thank you for that. So we have two speakers on this application. First of all, Mr. O'Grady, who is the applicant. Now's your chance to come and speak to us. And as you will have seen, you've got up to 5 minutes to talk to us. And if we're still speaking at 4.5, we'll tell you there's 30 seconds left. So as soon as you're ready, press the right-hand button and the clock will start counting down.
Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Chris O'Grady. I am the owner of Fields Farm on Barton Lane, Frumpton. Thank you all for considering my application and giving me the opportunity to speak. I purchased the property in June 2021, a 3-bedroom property and former farmhouse situated on a large plot. It's surrounded by 2 5-bedroom barn conversions that were originally attached to a Fields Farm, which were split off and sold to a house developer in the early 1990s by the previous owners. One of the barn conversions has been owned by my parents ever since, and where I was raised myself as a Frumpton boy and now man. To address the planning report and form the basis of our appeal to the committee, I'd like to make and elaborate on a few points. The existing house is in poor condition by today's standards and has been for some time. The purpose of the application is to remove the unsightly and poor quality extensions, replacing them with improvements to bring the building up to the required and expected standard of a modern family home. In response to the comments made by the conservation officer, the property is situated 0.8 miles from the village and from the centre of the conservation area. Whilst this is the case, we have still endeavoured to design a sympathetic and proportionate property in the same vein as our fellow villagers who have also looked to maximise and modernise their own properties over the past 10 to 20 years in the village. The report has suggested that the new building will be nearly 72% larger than its original, which is resulting in it being deemed a disproportionate addition to the original building, therefore making it an inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. The proposed and existing volumes and their calculations are shown on the submitted plans in drawing number 0044. When incorporating the volume of the loft space from the original building and using this to develop the same loft space, this should leave us with a overall increase of just under 48%, so below the acceptable rule of thumb increase of 50%. Our vastly experienced architect employed to design and submit the application for the development of the property has incorporated the planning officer's comments to reviving and updating the building with regards to its design and scale so that it can be retained for use as a modern family dwelling, and has redesigned it accordingly into the scheme now before the committee. Look to fully work and collaborate with the council throughout the process, taking on board any and all feedback and implementing this into our submitted design. We have been most patient and respectful of the process, and at this point where an outcome is soon to be determined, almost 8 months after the validation of the current application, we have faith in the proverb being true, that patience is a virtue. We won't be impacting any of the existing trees, and all aspects of the development will be carried out sensitively. We have also ensured that the new extensions that connect to the existing building, that we would be protecting the heritage of the property, which we do have the utmost respect for, through the careful selection and use of materials, roof tile, brick, glazing, and rainwater goods. To close, I would like to say that we've invested our time, energy and money into this application for the sake of our young family that have loved being raised in this village, as I was. To have this fall down and be unsuccessful because of a potential error in figures or deeming the property to be in the thick of the conservation area when it is situated nearly a mile away from the heart of the village would be heartbreaking for us all. We're merely looking to put our stamp on the village, just as previous owners did 30 years ago, contributing towards the improvement and modernisation of the evolving village that is becoming more beautiful and unique with each development carried out within it. Thank you very much for your time, much appreciated. Thank you.
And thank you very much as well. That was very clear. So well within time as well. So thank you for that. And then Councillor Rex Walker wishes to speak as well, who is speaking in support of the applicant. Yes, so we'll have the conservation area map, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So 2 key questions for you in determining this application. 1, would the proposed extensions result in disproportionate additions? And 2, to what extent would the proposals cause harm to the conservation area? On disproportionality, you have a judgment to make about how to interpret the policy in the NPPF. I'd seek to persuade you that you can legitimately determine that the proposals would not result in a disproportionately large building, and further that in doing so, you would not be creating what may be construed as a dangerous precedent for the future. We are quite rightly very regularly reminded that each application is different and must be determined on its own merits. The authority uses guidance that extensions which result in additions which increase a building's volume by more than 50% from its original, i.e. 1948 size, are likely to be deemed disproportionate. However, it should be noted that this is not planning policy, but a rule of thumb. We might say this gives us guidelines, not tramlines, and in particular cases, judgment could and should diverge from this where the circumstances permit. So, what are the case-specific circumstances here? You'd have noted from the papers a discrepancy in the volume increase calculations used by the applicant and the officers. The proposals represent a 71% increase on the original dwelling, but a 24% increase on the existing dwelling. Much of the previous extensions have been in situ for a long time, and I would say that the effluxion of time is relevant to this assessment. This is not a case where the size of the dwelling is increasing rapidly in a short space of time. This is a fairly substantial detached dwelling set in a large plot in an open setting. It can, in my view, accommodate this scale of extension without creating the appearance or feeling of a jacked up building disproportionately extended. Contrast this with smaller buildings one sees in denser areas of development, where you easily get the impression that a quart has indeed been squeezed into a pint pot. Finally, and I'd submit crucially, we have the settled view of the local community, expressed clearly and consistently through the parish meeting, that they wish disproportionately to be viewed sympathetically, particularly where that allows residents and their families to remain in the village. It is accepted that this is not planning policy, but please also consider what it is and where it comes from. This is a clearly articulated position, discussed and voted upon at several parish meetings. It's a positive approach to the judgment you'll make this evening. It comes from a place, literally, where smaller, tightly knit communities value and want to preserve their social character as much as their physical character, and is set within a context of significant neighbouring greenbelt development already permitted and proposed, such as at Fareham, the power station, and sand and gravel at Barton, leading to an understandable view that greenbelt policy application for homeowners ought to be flexed in their favour where possible. Turning now to impacts on the conservation area, I invite you to conclude, as I've done, that there is no harm, or that any is even less than at the lower end of less than substantial, as the officer has concluded. The conservation report states that, quote, a balanced judgment will be required having regard to the scale of any harm and the significance of the asset. Regarding the significance of the asset, please pay particular attention to the location of the property. It is on the extreme perimeter of the area, as you can see. Were you to travel past the property and ask yourself, where am I? I say you would answer on the road between Barton and Thrumpton, some distance from the heart of the village where the sensitivity is significantly higher. There are no listed buildings nearby, and Fields Farm is not identified as a positive building according to the townscape appraisal. It is, of course, a historic farmhouse, but in conservation terms, we're looking at a cold rather than a hot potato. Regarding the scale of any harm, please pay particular attention to the positive aspects of the proposals. Removal of unsympathetic previous alterations deemed an enhancement, conservation-style roof lights, dormers, rear single-storey extension, bay window replacement, porch retention, rainwater goods, timber gates, all supported by the conservation officer. The only objection appears to be that it is, quote, slightly too large.
30 seconds.
And extensions, quote, not subordinate. The extensions are stepped in and stepped down to stress the prominence of the original dwelling in a way that I consider it to be reasonable to conclude is sympathetic and appropriate.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. We have heard from our two speakers who are both plainly speaking in support of the application, and the recommendation from officers is to not to grant permission primarily on policy reasons. Do you want to come back on and pick up on any of the points we've heard, or anything you need to respond to, or should we can just, yeah, if you'd like to.
Thank you. So we are required by the National Policy Framework, Section 13, to consider extensions or alterations of a building, how they would result in respect of the original building, not the existing building, because buildings can get extended over time, and that's why we need to refer always to the original building so that they don't result in more and more built form, because the overall aim of the Greenbelt policy is to protect openness. With regards to the calculations, my calculations are based on the original volume of the dwelling, and location of the site within the conservation area. There's a reason why the conservation area includes so much land around this village, which has a strong history of being an agricultural setting. So the farmhouse was surrounded by fields that were worked, and therefore it makes sense to be included in the conservation area, and in a way to preserve its significance and to contribute to the significance of the conservation area at the same time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we may have further questions later as we go through the discussion. So I've seen Councillor Thomas, you wish to speak on this one.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just a few comments, really. I know that our officers work very hard on Greenbelt applications with the applicants to try to come up with recommendations that do fit within the 50% space guidelines. And Councillor Walker's called that a rule of thumb, but it isn't an outlier, a Rushcliffe outlier. That is a common, as far as I'm aware, that is a common way that other authorities do it as well. And 50% is a reasonable amount of volume increase to consider, a boundary. And our officers do are consistent in that. And I think it's important that we do have consistency in that. Also, Councillor Walker said that volume calculations, that this is not an area, it's a big plot, so it's not creating overdevelopment, but that's not what the volume calculations are about in the Greenbelt. It is a Greenbelt thing, not an overdevelopment thing, the volume calculation. And I'd also say that the location it is in the conservation area. For whatever reason, the conservation area was drawn in that place. And saying that it's at the edge of the conservation area and not near the village centre, I think that would, you could say that about any conservation area application that was on the edge. And I actually think that all sympathy with the applicant for what he wants to do, but I don't think it's very far off something that could quite easily be provided. An extension of the size that he wants could easily be provided, respecting both Greenbelt and the conservation area. And so I'd like to move the recommendation, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, we're still very early in the discussion, but I'll ask at this stage, have you got a seconder for that proposal at this stage? I don't think we have. So let's continue with any questions and comments. Councillor Mason.
Yes, I mean, you can look at it two ways, and it is quite a difficult one to look at. If you're just looking at the house, it's a lovely house. It's a farmhouse. But I think one of the most, and I've written down, that the main thing that we are looking at is that it is in a conservation area, and we have certain things that we should look at and take into account, whether we like what we see or not, and whether it's necessary. Obviously, the applicant thinks that it is, and it probably is to him, but that's not what we're looking at. We are actually looking at, is it fit and suitable for the green belt? So I do find it quite difficult, but I do know that when I had an extension done on my house, I had to keep my extension to a certain level. I didn't go over and above what the officers, and I talked to them, I didn't go over and above what I was allowed to do. So I do support the fact of what the officers say, grudgingly, that it is conservation area and that we should not support it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are you basically seconding the... Right, okay, I'll just make a note of that, but we have got more speakers to go. Councillor Edivine, and then Councillor Calvert, and then Councillor Ellis.
I'd just quite like to look at, we talked about the calculation. The applicant has basically said if you include the loft space of the original building, then the actual increase in the size is 48%. Your calculations obviously differ. I think that was what the claim was made in his presentation. And I think he was referring to the original dwelling, not the existing dwelling. So I guess the key question is, are you talking about the used living space or the total volume of the building? And the reason I'm asking this is because when I first became a councillor, I can remember one of the first planning applications that I was exposed to, shall we say, was one where there was a basement involved. And I think the overall view then was that whilst it had to be included in the volume of the building, no one could see it because how can it spoil the openness of the green belt? But it was a hard and fast calculation because it was creating extra living space. So the question is, because the roof space has not previously been lived in, is that, if you did the calculation based on the original roof space, is the applicant right in his suggestion that it's a 48% increase on the original?
So I've included the roof as a whole in the volume calculation.
Okay.
Both for the original dwelling Sorry. So I've included the roof as a whole, including the loft and unused space under the roof. That is included in the calculation of the original building, and the same for the proposed. So it's not just based on floor space or head height. It includes everything, the roof included, whether it would be occupied or not.
Does that help?
Doesn't help my decision, but
It
clears up the
calculations.
calculation.
Yeah.
I think, you know, at the end of the day, there's two opposing views on a calculation. That's what I was trying to get some clarity on.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Calvert, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to carry on that same discussion, specifically on the Greenbelt issue and the figures, is that interpretation that you've made what you would do with and have done with previous applications of this sort within the Greenbelt, where you described taking in the whole area, living area?
Yes, this is how we approach every single proposal.
Okay.
It's easier when it's a flat roof, but
Yeah.
when it's hipped or pitched, yeah, we include everything.
Okay, that's on the Greenbelt. Then it's really just to echo the point from yourself about the conservation area, that the actual map of it doesn't happen by accident. There's that long tongue to include this area because when the conservation area was being decided, it was felt that it's so important to have that extension as you described. So I'm in a position where I will be supporting this application. Thank you.
So can you say that? I couldn't quite hear what you said then.
I will support this application. Oh, sorry, I will support the recommendation. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear on that because couldn't quite hear you. Right, okay. So Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. The calculations aren't the critical point here. Let's start from the acceptance of the 70-odd%. Is that a sufficient argument to reject this application? And I don't think it is. I agree with what Councillor Walker said in its entirety, and I am influenced by the fact that it seems to suit the residents of the area, which is maybe not a material planning factor, but to me personally is very important. I think that the grounds for rejection are pretty thin compared to the benefit that granting permission would bring to the applicant and in fact the area. All this constitutes work and growth of a sort, and we're sadly lacking in growth as a nation. So I would tend to reject officers' recommendations.
Oh, that's fine. Well, that's the reason we're here tonight. It's before the committee. We are being asked to make a decision tonight, and that's why we are looking at the pluses, the plus points and minus points, and asking questions. And eventually, we will come to and we have to weigh it up, don't we? It's all a question of balance, and we have to weigh up what is before us, and along with the details in the report. So don't feel bad about having a contrary view. I mean, that's what we're here for. Councillor Malinder.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to agree with what Councillor Ellis has just said. You know, once again, we have this someone trying to do their best in a village and to make something, it's somewhere pleasant to live for themselves and their family. No one objects in the village the parish meeting is in full support of keeping the family in the village. And it seems to me that we're not really looking at the extensions that are already there, which I understand are being demolished, and which are not, well, as far as I can see, very good extensions. And it seems that nowadays we have this far more strict designation of the green belt and conservation area rules, as it were, or guidance rather than in the past when these extensions were built. So, you know, if you've got a very hideous extension that's built in the 1960s, you've just got to put up with it because it's already there, and you want to do something that will enhance the area and make the village better. I've just been trying to look at a street view, and you can't, because Google Maps doesn't think it's part of the village, which is quite interesting. It's not counted as a built-up area, so it doesn't do a street view. It just doesn't go any further down Barton Lane. So I think that indicates how far out it is. And I'd like to ask that the reason we were given as to why this house is in the conservation area, which does look really bizarre when you look at it on a map, is that apparently it was used as a farm, and I think this is what was said, that it was used for farming roundabout, and it was a farmhouse. So I'd just like to ask, is it a farmhouse now, and is it associated with any of the farmland nearby, and is that still used for agricultural purposes in the same way it was when the conservation area was set up? Because if the reason that it's in the conservation area is because of it's because it's a farmhouse and it's surrounded by farmland, and that's no longer the case, then it shouldn't really be in the conservation area. It's just an aberration that it happens to be in there. So, you know, I believe that, and I'm hoping this will come soon, in these cases, in these kinds of applications, and it happens all the time, that the current government is going to make some changes to allow this kind of application to go through. I mean, I do hope some of the other things aren't quite so good, but this particular aspect where you've got, I remember not long ago we had an application on which was included in the green belt, despite the fact that the actual land was covered in concrete, but oh no, it's part of the green belt. So they're actually going to increase the biodiversity of that site by, I think it was over 100%. But again, because of this rule about the green belt, which seems to be applied, that wasn't given permission. And I think it's really sad that people that live in the villages and are trying their best to enhance the area and to stay in the village and make a nice family home for themselves are being, you know, it's bad for them, this kind of decision. So I do hope that it will change in future. But anyway, I shall not be voting for the recommendation. And if you could just explain to me about the farmland reasoning, please.
Thank you, Councillor Mallon. There's some really interesting points there, so thank you for that. Can we come back on the farmland use, and then I'll go to. I thought.
Can I ask something that would be relevant?
Oh yes, well, go on then. Yep.
Rather than go back and forth, this would add to Councillor Mallander's comments, I think. When was the conservation area last reviewed, do we know? Because I know that many of the conservation areas in all of the villages are currently being reviewed. Because I've had countless ones, because I have an awful lot of sympathy for all of the arguments that have been put forward. And I think we ought to make sure that we don't confuse conservation area with greenbelt, because conservation area is conservation area and greenbelt is greenbelt. So some of the comments we've had sort of mixing the two together, if you like. But I just find, you know, I absolutely have a lot of sympathy with the in small villages, trying to actually create progress in those villages, allowing families to stay in those villages. You read all over the place of sort of families that are pushed out of the villages from which they've grown up in. And I know all of those things are not planning considerations, but it's always something that in smaller villages, you need to try and see some progress. But at the same time, I'm slightly, I want to support the preservation of the green belt as well. But and in fact, only a few months ago, I think I argued against a development being allowed. But to be fair, that was new houses on an existing farmyard and not an extension to an existing house. So anyway, I think that I would like to know when the conservation area was last reviewed, and is it currently being reviewed now?
Okay, relevant questions. So can we come back on the farmland query and also the conservation query, please?
Thank you, Chair. The conservation area appraisal dates from March 2010. And it includes all of the properties on Church Lane and the full extent of Thrumpton Hall's parkland. So this explains why a large amount of fields are included within the conservation area. The application site, the farmhouse, is a non-designated heritage asset at the end of the day. It has our architectural and historic significance because it preserves details and historic fabric from when it was built, from 19th century, and it reminds the users and the public that it was built to serve the farmer who worked the land around. So this is where the historic significance derives from. Whether now it is a farmhouse and the fields around are connected to the occupier, being the farmer occupying the farm, the dwelling, it's not relevant because life evolves, and it
still has those.
Yes.
Architecture and
history. It retains the same architectural and historic significance that it did from when it was built.
Do you want to come back on that, Councillor Marder?
Yes, please, Councillor Butler. I think that these new extensions actually do enhance the building, whereas the ones that are there now don't, and they're going to be demolished. And the ones that are coming are actually in keeping, using the similar materials and set back so that the original building, built in the 19th century, which you can see is actually enhanced by these. So I don't see that having these extensions is going to is spoiling the original building at all, especially since the ones that are being demolished. So, and I think, if it was included because of that reason, and that reason no longer is the case about the farmland. And I do understand about the difference between the conservation area, which is one point, and the green belt with another. But we do have to take those two things together, that we have to look at the whether or not, I think there is an exception to be made to keep people in the village, and to, villages, people that live there can quite often end up moving out because there's nowhere for them to live. Basically, there's not enough social housing, there's not enough houses that family homes that are good for them. So they end up moving out, And is that what we want? Is that what we want in the end? That if in the end, if the people decide, well, we're not going to do it, going to move somewhere else, and you have a house that might be architecturally interesting but is derelict, and then eventually it gets knocked down. So, and I've seen that happen as well. So it's better for it to be enhanced in this way with these particular extensions that I think do enhance it, rather than and getting rid of the ones that don't. And I think that is an overriding reason to give permission for this application.
Okay, thank you. It's decisions again, isn't it? Councillor Regan.
Thank you, Chairman. As a purpose, I'm here today, so here it comes. I'd like to thank the officers for obviously highlighting this, obviously bring the recommendation to the planning team, because that is your role. Your role is to look at the technical side of planning applications and highlight where they should be approved and rejected. I think it's the councillors' role to represent individuals that elected us in the first place, and I think this is a classic example of where the councillors should step up and fulfil that role, because we have and I'm not familiar with the technical terminologies, so forgive me, I might ramble a bit. I'm sure I'll be stopped if I am. But it seems that there are no objections locally. There are no objections from residents within Thrumpton. There is no clear objection from the Thrumpton Council, if I've read that correctly. So the parish council is keen to support small-scale modifications, extensions to enhance the village. There's no objection from Councillor Brown. I don't know whether he's made any statement, but there is no objection. Councillor Walker made a clear, firm argument for support or rejection of the recommendation. And we've had two excellent arguments on this side, strangely. But the reality is we have a property here that is, as you say, it's nearly derelict from an environmental perspective. It's probably leaking carbon dioxide. This gentleman is obviously going to invest to make the building. I know we haven't heard this. I know it's not material, but I'm sure it would make the building far more environmentally. It would improve its environmental features. He's clearly investing to keep his family local. It's the nature of the proposal is in terms of the aesthetics, the rendering, the windows, the brickwork, so renovating the chimney stacks, removing the existing extensions, for me, enhances the building. And then there's this, I want to say arbitrary, it's not arbitrary, the 50% guideline. And, you could cut it any way, but it seems to me that we are fundamentally relying on this 50% to make a recommendation to reject, when yes, it's 71%, so I accept that it's beyond the guidelines. We've got to think back to when those guidelines were created and what they were designed to actually accomplish. And I'm pretty certain that whoever came up with that 50% guideline under the national framework was not looking to prevent properties like this from going ahead. And I think as a councillor representing the people who elected us, from the perspective of the building being significantly improved, from the perspective of being sensitive to the framework and what that originally, why the 50% came into place. And I think it's our job to be a little bit flexible, or demonstrate flexibility for the right reasons. And you're arguing it's 48% or 24.7 on the existing structures, but 70% on the original structures. I think for the overall benefit, I think I would vote to reject the recommendation and support the application as it stands. And I think as councillors, we'd be doing a disservice to Thrumpton, to the gentlemen, to our fellow councillors, if we do support the recommendation to reject. I'm sorry I phrase it that way, but that's the way it's phrased. So I hope persuaded enough people to come over the line. Thank you.
No, that's very clear. Understand completely where you're coming from. Probably no need. Or do you want to come back? If that's okay. Yes, yeah. If you.
Thank you. Yes, if I could just clarify just something that Councillor Reagan just mentioned about the 50% rule being within national policy. I'd just like to make it clear that it's not a national policy, it's the internal guidance note that we have. Just wanted to make that clear across sort of everyone's minds. The MPPF is quite clear in the fact that the extensions should not result in disproportionate additions over and above the size of the original building. It's our internal guidance note that sort of provides and allows us to have an element of consistency sort of in considering and determining these applications. That's where the 50% sort of comes into effect. But it's also important to consider the mass and the scale. So not just looking at the maths as such, but also sort of just looking at it overall. I think in terms of the existing extensions, again, you know, sort of take the point that they can be sort of considered as unsightly. You know, their removal might be an improvement, but again, we've got to also sort of consider what the proposed extensions are. And I think the officer's report is quite clear in that respect of sort of the scale and the mass of those two side extensions, and the considerations in respect of sort of both the green belt being disproportionate, but also sort of the conservation area aspect as well, if that's okay.
Thank you. Do you want to, you're coming back on this, are you, Councillor
Yes.
Regan? And I'll come to Councillor Chaplin.
Thank you for that clarification. Given that 50% is an internal Rushcliffe recommendation, then surely we can express more flexibility on that. But may I ask that we pull up the slides with the original and the proposed front aspects, and put your points to anyone who has any who's considering supporting the recommendations, whether that is proportionate. And I think that's the one, yes. I think it's a significant improvement, and I think it retains the original features. There's an improvement on the windows, there's an improvement on the entrance, the chimneys looks like they're going to be rendered or I guess pointed. And the dormer windows I think add significantly to the qualities of the building. So if we can leave that up there for a few minutes to digest, I would appreciate that.
Funnily enough, I was also going to ask for that slide to come back as well, because I just had I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but because I was just having a query about the proposed painting or maybe rendering, because on the existing building we have the rendering or painting of the ground floor, and it looks as if the rendering is going to go up to the first floor in the middle, but I can't quite see from the plan if that is the case. Is that the proposed? Does it say something like to be rendered?
It says brick / rendered.
So there is the proposal is to.
We don't believe the render is original.
Okay, right. Thank you. That was my question actually. So, Councillor Chaplin.
Okay, so there have been some persuasive arguments, but I think I still feel that I'm going to support the recommendation. I do think that does look too big, and I do think we're not saying that this can't be improved, that the building that's there can't be improved, that the extensions that aren't very nice at the moment can't be taken down and the house extended, but we're saying not that much. And there are rules about what happens in the green belt. I've been here long enough to have had to vote against things that I think should go ahead or for things that I think shouldn't because we follow rules. And so for me, I'm going to support the recommendation.
Thank you. Right. Sorry. Yes, Councillor Manager.
I mean, can we ask the applicant whether the rendering is going all the way up? Because I think what that does, if that is the case, is it makes it stand out more against the extensions. And I'm really impressed, Councillor Reagan, because that is a really good point that you made. Why are we here? We're here to represent the people, not just to follow the rules, because in that case we wouldn't have any planning committees. We'd just have the people that we'd just have the officers making the decisions, and the officers make wonderful decisions all the time and work really hard, and we really appreciate you. But we're here at a planning committee because sometimes we need to make the decision.
And indeed, you're right, and that's what I said earlier on. We are here. We are the decision makers, and we're never here. Whatever the application is, whatever a recommendation is, we are not here to simply rubber stamp things. We are here to discuss and make a decision, aren't we? At the end of the day, and I think. You're wanting to come. Sorry. Yes. Yes. You asked a question about the confirmation of the rendering. So yes, can you come back on that, please?
On the elevation, it says existing brick to be repointed. So we haven't actually gone into that much detail to assess the proposed materials. Whether the proposal is to retain the render is absolutely fine because it's existing. I think we would have noticed if the proposal included to render the whole property. That would have raised an objection from the conservation officer, I'm sure. But there's nothing on the submitted details to suggest the proposal, the dwelling would be rendered. In fact, on the proposed front elevation, there are details about the materials for the side extensions, and it says the brick would be agreed with the council. Thank you.
Okay, right, thank you. Right, I've now lost. It was Councillor Thomas, wasn't it? Yes.
Yes, I just want to come back really because I'm, hearing quite a lot of things that I agree with, from all sides of the debate really. And yes, we're here as planning committee to make different decisions, but I don't think it's our job to redefine national greenbelt policy, and I don't think it's our job here to redraw conservation area boundaries. I think it's our job to know what the constraints are and to consider them fully when making decisions. I'd also say, I mean, I can ask if this is the case, but as far as I'm aware, who's going to occupy the property isn't actually a material consideration. And it comes up quite a lot where we get applications where people are saying, I'm absolutely not saying that this is the case in this situation, because I have quite a huge amount of sympathy with the applicant. But we do get a lot of cases where applications are made and we get quite a lot of story about who's going to live in it and how much they need the house. But then when it comes to it, and once the planning permission comes in and somebody else, lives there or it's sold on. So as far as I'm aware, it's not a material consideration, but perhaps we could check that. The Thrumpton neighbourhood plan in preparation and the views of the village, yes, absolutely. I'm hearing that and agreeing with that. But the neighbourhood plan isn't yet in place. If it was, it would be able to colour the decisions and perhaps change the policy framework for making this decision. But it's not in place as far as I'm aware. I don't know what stage it's at, whether it's emerging, as it were. And as far as the Green Belt is concerned, very, very special circumstances haven't been established. And I think there are plenty of ways that this extension could take place and provide the facilities that these people need to stay in the village and be compliant with policy. And I think it just needs that application to be, that plan to come forward, and that application, and you know, the officers are already putting in a lot of help, and I think that could continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Points made. Very clear. Right. Does anyone else wish to say anything on this? Because we. Oh.
One was a question, really.
Yeah.
The question was, is who is going to occupy the property and material consideration?
Sorry, yeah. So, well, it's not really a material condition, is it? So although we've heard what's been said, and it's at the end of the day, it's a domestic dwelling, but who is actually going to be in that domestic dwelling is not of planning relevance. Does that answer your question? Okay, right. This is a really difficult one, isn't it? For all the reasons we've heard, and both for those who are supporting the recommendation to refuse permission and others who are sympathetic to the application. But we are where we are. I don't think anyone else is desperate to speak now, so I think we've got to come towards a decision, because we've had the recommendation as per the report to refuse permission for the reasons shown. So we've had that moved by Councillor Thomas, I think it was, and seconded by Councillor Mason. So we've got that the recommendation is moved and seconded. I think we need to go to a vote now. So those in favour of that, please show. Five. Those against? So those against that recommendation? 5. Right. So that's 5 in favour and 5 against. So that comes down to.
I think the chairman has to cast.
Oh, the joys of having an even number on a committee. Right. Okay. Well, as I said, this really has been is a very, very difficult decision, because I was struggling genuinely between the arguments, and I think a lot of us were on this. But I did vote against the recommendation, and not. Sorry, I voted for against the application. I voted for the recommendation to refuse, not so much on the green belt and the detail on that, but frankly on the, if I'm being perfectly blunt here, what green belt or not, on the appearance of it, and and picking up the point of the appearance and of how it looks in the area. So it's a difficult decision, this, but I am going to, my casting vote has to go with the recommendation to refuse permission for the reasons given. But I have absolute understanding and sympathy for colleagues who were in support of the proposals. So that means that the recommendation has been to refuse permission has been carried. Okay, clear on that? But thank you, everybody, and thank you for your contributions as well. And I'm sure there will be further opportunities for you, looking as you sort of decide what your next steps will be. Right, okay, that's the final application for. Oh, sorry. Oh yes, sorry, yes, yeah. We'll just get Councillor Walker there. Right, so the only other item on the agenda is really for noting is a report of recent appeals. They are what they are. Does anyone have any questions or comments? No? Did you, officers, did you want to point out anything? There was one of these, wasn't there? The Thoroton application. Did we want to just clarify, or unless anyone's got any questions?
Yeah, just for members to note, it's the last one on the table, right at the end of the page, was the Thoroton appeal. That was allowed, the decision came through a few weeks ago, and that was in relation to the public inquiry that was held, I think, back in sort of June, July time, and it got adjourned until there was another day in the beginning of August where it resumed, and then the decision came through a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, welcome any questions on that either now or sort of afterwards, or I follow up by email if you do.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, probably no questions tonight. So that's the final item on the agenda. So we'll bring the meeting to a close. It's 7:41. Thank you everybody for your contributions, and thank you